There are two major issues which are challenging the ability of the Jewish people in North America and Israel to feel a deep sense of commonality and shared destiny. As we've spoken many a time here at the Institute, and the core idea behind my father's thinking on Auschwitz or Sinai was that we could get together in Israel around Auschwitz. We could join, world Jewry could join when Jews are dying. The question is whether we could actually live with each other after Auschwitz. And is Sinai something that we could all share and create a united Jewish community in which Israel, whether it's at the center or whether it's at an integral part of Jewish life worldwide, whether Israel could play that role? The two issues that are challenging that in particular, one of them is the issue of what a Jewish democratic state means, and how does Israel unfold and deal with issues of state and religion. And the second is issues relating to Yehuda v'Shomron, settlements, contested territory, occupation, whatever you call it. Those are two big issues which are creating, or which we have to find a way to talk about. And we need to develop a Torah on each one, and to find a way to engage with Israel and to engage with our communities on developing a narrative on these two core issues. Tonight we're going to deal with the first. And one of the great challenges of Israel, and again, this is for those of you who are in the I Engage curriculum, one of the differences between Israel and Jewish life outside of Israel is that when Jewish life outside of Israel is built around institutions in which you belong to the institution that you feel closely affiliated with, no single institution claims to exhaust all of Jewish life. You could belong to one shul and not belong to another. You could belong to one alphabet and not another alphabet. And the nature of world Jewish life is that you don't assume that your alphabet or your institution is supposed to be the sole institution in which all Jews are supposed to join. Your goal is to find a place that you find meaningful and that gives expression to what you believe and what you care about. Now, you might not like other institutions, but actually not liking them is part of the fun. It's like, I don't go there. It's like, that's who I don't belong to. Part of the fun of joining a synagogue is not going to another synagogue. And two different synagogues of very, very different commitments and ideologies could live side by side. Because they don't undermine. One's existence doesn't undermine the existence of the other. But what happens when we don't have different institutions and denominations, but we have only one state of Israel? How does Zionism obligate us to reorient our thinking? Because in a synagogue, if you don't agree with me, I simply say to you, leave, or I leave. But what happens when, by definition, we're talking about a country in which everybody is a citizen, and the one thing you can't do is say to somebody, if you don't agree with me, leave. Now, how do we think in these contexts? And what makes it even more complicated is that what happens within the context of the state of Israel, where sometimes we're talking about the state shul, where it's not just that the state ostensibly belongs to everybody, but this is the state shul. This is the Jewish people's shul. How do we share? How do we live with people who we profoundly disagree with? And how does Israel become a space in which Jews of profoundly diverse ideologies are capable of living and living, respecting, thinking, making space for each other? That's our theme tonight. It's the general question of state and religion, with a particular focus on issues of the Kotel, and it goes beyond. The format is going to be a brief opening statement by each one of our guests, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, and then we're going to have here a dialogue, questions and answers, and then we're going to open it up to all of you, in which your primary challenge is to simply ask questions. Nobody is here, and I want to tell you something about the Institute. I never, ever will stage in the Institute a debate in which the goal is to bring people from opposite poles so that they will amuse you. It's not educational. The goal is always to bring people who, I don't care what label they're under, what defines them is that they're thoughtful people. They're not labeled people. They're people who care about issues, care about the Jewish people, respect each other. And even if they disagree, that's fine. But it's a machloket l'shem shamayim. It's not a machloket to create an interesting evening so that you could hear these types of the polls. That has no educational value whatsoever. And if we don't do that here, I'm going to ask you also not to participate in that. This is not the forum for you to debate any one of the people here, but for your opportunity to get to understand the Torah of two very, very serious people who've spent a lifetime thinking about this question, struggling with it, and trying to shape a new Israel and to try to improve our country. Our two guests, but actually before I introduce our two guests, I have a distinct pleasure to introduce, I think his title is president, but I'm not sure, the new president of Chovevei Torah, Rabbi Asher Lopatin. And I don't know if the title is president, but you're in charge of being an unbelievable force for good within Orthodoxy and with North America, and they could not have picked a better candidate. So welcome. It's really a joy to welcome you. And a senior rabbinic fellow. So welcome. Anat Hoffman was born in Jerusalem and in her teens was an Israeli swimming champion. I'm just telling you, listen. And for those of you who know, that's actually the only sport we're relatively good at. So to be a champion in that actually counts. Basketball is schwach. There's certain height issues. No joke. After Army service, she received her BSc in psychology at the University of California in Los Angeles and then pursued graduate studies at Bar-Ilan University. Anat is a founding member of Women of the Wall and has served on the board of Israel's Women's Network, the Association of Civil Rights in Israel, and many other Israeli organizations for social change. After serving as Jerusalem City Councilwoman for 14 years, where she represented the civil rights and peace movement, Anat became executive director of Israel's Religious Action Center in April 2002 and guides the IRAC in its work to promote Jewish pluralism, tolerance, and equality in both the secular and religious spheres. During Anat's tenure, she has expanded IRAC's mission to go beyond the courts and the Knesset and to engage in helping people directly through social action. As a champion of equality and guided by the concept of Tikkun Olam, Ms. Hoffman has led the battles for the rights of women to pray at the Western Wall, women's equal pay for equal work, and the push to provide adequate municipal services for more than 200,000 Palestinian residents in Jerusalem. It would be very, very hard to find another individual in Israel who does more day in and day out, alone, often attacked, often loved, but often very, very alone. To find anybody who does more for making Israel a more decent society and to make Israel a place where world Jewry could feel that they also have a home here and that this is truly the homeland of all Jews. You'd be very pressed. There might be a few others who are doing okay, but you won't find anyone who's doing more than Anat Hoffman.
Thank you. Stop it.
Rabbi Dr. Shlomo Riskin attained rabbinic ordination at Yeshiva University from his mentor, Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik, and his PhD from New York University. Rabbi Riskin founded and serves as chancellor of Or Torah Stone colleges and graduate programs, a network of groundbreaking institutions, including a rabbinical and communal leadership college for men, a college for advanced Jewish studies, the first and only program in the world training women advocates for the rabbinic courts, a legal aid center for agunot, a women's Hesder program enabling observant women to serve in the Israel Defense Force, the first and only program enabling women with developmental disabilities to spend a year in Israel, and a program exposing secular Israelis to the beauty and relevance of their Jewish culture and heritage. Rabbi Riskin has also published 5 books, scores of articles and monographs on Judaism and contemporary issues, as well as a weekly column that is syndicated in newspapers worldwide. He is also the founding chief rabbi of Efrat, Israel, where he resides with his wife Vicky and his extended family. And it's not by accident this room is as filled tonight, because both panelists, now it's my turn to speak about Rabbi Riskin, he made Aliyah and didn't necessarily only want to serve North American Jewry, but he said, I'm going to make Aliyah and bring a different voice of orthodoxy to this country. And that this is a country in which the way orthodoxy goes, in many ways, will determine the way the rest of the country goes. And the particular power of orthodoxy within Israeli society, both within the Haredi and the religious Zionist community, and within the Masorati community, who aren't Orthodox, but who believe that the only legitimate Judaism is orthodoxy, and who together constitute about 55% of Israeli society. The voice that orthodoxy will take in this country is going to shape the whole country. And from the moment he came, whether it's on issues towards non-Jews and towards Palestinians, and whether it's to women, and whether it's, as you saw throughout his bio, this is a man who said, it's on my shoulders to create a different voice of orthodoxy, and through that change the religious nature of this country. And when you make Aliyah, it's very easy to sit back and say, okay, I know I'm now going to serve North American Jewry from Israel. It takes great courage to say, I want to bring what I learned to North America in order to change Israel. And Rabbi Riskin is such a force for good, and it is truly an honor to welcome you here to this institution.
This is a very good audience.
This is your friend. And so
It paid to come here just for the audience.
these are your friends, and these are rabbis and educators across North America who are influencing hundreds of thousands of people. And it's your chance to share with them your vision. And Anat, I'd like to start with you. A brief opening. How do you understand the role of state and religion? What do you understand the core challenge? What's your vision? What are some of the challenges you're facing? And then we'll continue to talk, but please begin. And you can make yourself comfortable.
Well, first, it was really worth coming. I didn't know, Daniel, you really think that? And we live here without the guest. I never knew you. Okay.
You didn't ask me.
Voila. So, hello. This is really awkward to sit down. I need to stand. I'm sorry.
You want to stand?
Political school, that's what they teach you. So recently we changed the name of the Israel Religious Action Center. It used to be called Hamerkaz LePluralism Yehudi. Yes, Pluralism Yehudi. We had to change it to Hamerkaz Hareformi Ledat Umedina. And the reason we changed it from Hamerkaz LePluralism Yehudi is that Israelis just didn't know what pluralism means. There is no word in Hebrew for pluralism. And what does it mean that there's not a word in Hebrew for pluralism? There isn't. I actually wrote the Academy of Words and Letters that we're looking for a word for pluralism. It's not the first time I've written them. I've written them years ago that I need a word for integrity. Israelis. Does anyone know how you say integrity in Hebrew? Yoshra. Yoshra, say it. Yoshra. Okay, so once this worked, I wrote them here, I think this was 2 years ago, that I need a word for accountability. Now, you don't know that. That's pretty new. So we're all going to say it. It's a hard word to say because you spit inadvertently when you say it. It's not to be said often in Hebrew. But we will say together, Yoshra, here, accountability. Achrayutiyut. Achrayutiyut. More people said it here than on the whole planet. Achrayutiyut. Okay, so if integrity is about 4 years old and achrayutiyut, accountability, is 9 months old, and if pluralism is yet at large, we have some work to do in this country, and that's my hope was that pluralism would become a Hebrew word, and that people wouldn't be calling our office and saying, "Because the petrolism, pluralism." What is pluralism anyway? So that's the point. The point is to have, in reality, what's said in our Declaration of Independence, שוויון מדיני וחברתי גמור לכל אזרחיה ללא הבדל דת, גזע ומין. Complete equality to all its inhabitants without a difference of religion and race and creed. That was the dream. That's what we were hoping for. This could be our constitution, and we don't have a constitution. Here we are, 65 years old, and we don't have it. Israel is a miracle. If you compare us to all the other countries our age, we really have done tremendous, we've built a tremendous home here. And trust me, I am aware of all the faults in that building. I know what's wrong with it, and still, fantastic miracle. I think one of the great helpers in making this fantastic state is your help. I truly believe that Israel is way too important to be left to Israelis, and I'm delighted that so many of you are engaged in. You really have a program called I Engage?
Yep.
יפה מאוד. So yes, I think it's a very worthwhile life to devote a life to making a difference in this country. No other country makes me so crazy mad like Israel. When I was studying in California, and there are some people here that make my biography, women who are founders of Women of the Wall, and Chaim Seidlerfelder, who introduced me to that there is more than one way to be Jewish. And trust me, kicking and screaming, I argued with him, there's only one way, and it ain't for me. But Chaim, are you here?
Yes, here.
Ah, yes. So, he gave me a book. What can you do? I'm looking around the friendly faces here, and some of you have made a big difference in Israel. And when I was in California, there was a proposition to stop gay people from being teachers in the schools. This was very upsetting to me, and I thought it's really worthwhile working for it. But you know what? I wouldn't like to be a city councilor in any other city but this town. And somehow here, making a difference really makes a difference in a profound way for me, for my kids, for the next generation, and for all of you. And I really feel at home with you I didn't know about, but all the rest I really did know that. Yes. So what is the issue at the wall? First, why the wall? When Bashevis Singer came to the wall with his son, his sons asked him, "Well, Pops, what do you think?" And he said, "Like any other veiling wall. It's unique, it's the only one, and it's the place where not Israeli women, but women like Helene, women from abroad, came to Israel for the conference on the empowerment of Jewish women, and they're the ones who thought it is worthwhile to pray the prayer for Israel, to do a Shechianu. What were you trying? I joined with a folding table because the hotel wouldn't lend them a folding table. The Hyatt has a policy, and owning a folding table and a megaphone, very important instruments for a social activist. I joined the Women of the Wall. So this is an idea that came from abroad. Many times Israelis say to me, "This is a foreign idea then. It's an import." Yes, well, so is Zionism. And so are many other fantastic inventions in Israel. They're all gifts from abroad, from other countries. We're so proud of the 9 Nobel Prize winners that we have. Look at their education. It's import for the most of it. And it's wonderful that we are enjoying the input from people from abroad. So why the wall? Because it's the only one. And because it is so clear there that it has become an ultra-Orthodox synagogue. And my struggle is not against Rabbi Shmuel Rabinovich, who is the in charge rabbi there, who believes, and this is in his book of Halakha. In fact, I brought you each a copy if you want to read, Women should not touch the wall if they're menstruating, and women should not be looking at a Torah. The gaze, looking during Hagbah, women should not be looking at the open Torah scroll if they're menstruating. I don't have a problem with him. This is what he believes. He has I put here all I took the whole page from his 531-page book where he writes where it's coming from. He's not the problem. The problem is the state who took the keys to the holiest site of the Jewish people and gave it to him. That's the problem. The problem is with the secular Knesset, with the secular police, with the secular court, with the secular institutions of Israel that have decided to give him sole and complete and full power over what's going to happen at the wall. And he's decided that the women's section is 12 meters and the men's section is 48. That men can wear a talit, pray out loud, put on phylacteries, blow shofar, read Torah, do whatever these Jewish things to do, and I'm jealous. And women, until recently, were criminalized for doing the same actions. And right now, I'm ending with that, men and women both can wear phylacteries, pray out loud, and wear a talis at the wall. We've come a long way, baby. But the Torah is still not allowed. Why not allowed? We cannot bring a Torah scroll from the outside. There is a not gender-specific rule, but a rule that no one is allowed to bring a Torah scroll from the outside. Any one of you who has a kid of special needs who's attached to a particular Torah, and there are stories in this room of kids who want to read from this Torah, which was their grandparents, because this is the one they trained on, because none of you is allowed to bring a Torah from the outside to the wall. You can have use of one of the 100 Torah scrolls who are there. Well, when I asked the rabbi to use one of those 100 Torah scrolls, which are state Torah scrolls, I was told that he's not allowed to give me because the donors did not allow women to read. Fine, I said, I'll donate one. Perfect, kosher, $25,000. Just let me donate it for the specific use of women. And he refuses to get the donation with strings attached, meaning with the demand that it will be for women. So the court allows me to read, but the regulation bars us from bringing the Torah in. That's our next struggle. Yes.
I arrived in Israel 30 years ago. The best decision I made next to marrying my wife. It's turned out to be a fascinating and frustrating and exciting and exasperating experience. We came to Efrat, and we came to try to fulfill a dream. And it was very romantic when I lived in New York and I announced that I was coming from the West Side to the West Bank. But then we arrived, my wife, 4 children and I, and the streets weren't paved, and the first winters were very difficult, and there was no heat, and there was no electricity. And we went out, my wife had it, and so had I, and we got babysitters for the kids, and we went to a Max's Cafe that was then in Jerusalem to spend an evening kind of away and a little bit alone. And we learned that evening a metaphor for Israel. Came the waiter. We said we'd like coffee. I'm sorry, I'm still from Brooklyn. Coffee. And the waiter said, Ness or Butts? Now, Ness is Nescafe, but it also means miracle. And Butts is Turkish coffee, affectionately called Butts, which means mud. And I thought to myself, that's exactly what Israel is, mud or miracle. It depends what your perspective is and what happened to you that day. So my wife and I both said together we would like Ness. But that wasn't the real metaphor. Because much to our chagrin, we didn't get Ness, we didn't get butts, we got hafuch. Cappuccino, topsy-turvy. And that's really what's happened. Israel is a kind of a kaleidoscope of a Ferris wheel, Coney Island, got these big Ferris wheels, ups and downs, and within the same several minutes. And when you think about it, I think Israel is the only state in the globe that had vicious political, ideological arguments, revisionists and laborites before there was even a state. And that was a hint to what was to happen. I'd like to try to talk about the essence of the question. I believe in Israel as a Jewish state. I don't believe that there need be any kind of conflict between a Jewish state and a democratic state, nor do I believe that there need be any kind of conflict between a pluralistic state and a Jewish state. I spend most of my life studying Talmud. And Talmud is an amazing literature. And that's what it is. It was compiled over 1,000 years, from 100 CE to probably 900, 100 BCE to 900 CE. And I don't think there is any literature in world history which contains so many different ideas about so many different areas. Nothing that is human was alien to the sages of the Talmud. There were tremendously conflicting ideals and ideas and positions, and everyone still respected each other. And I often think that if I had just one question to ask God, I would ask him, how can it possibly be that the people who spend most of their time studying that literature come out so narrow-minded and non-pluralistic? I honestly mean this, I don't understand it. I believe that Israel should be a Jewish state. We deserve one after 2,000 years of exile. One Jewish state in the family of nations. I believe that that Jewish state should reflect our fundamental values. Every human being created in the image of God. Every human being with an inalienable right to be free and inviolate. I believe that the Sabbath and our festivals should be felt as national holidays and rest days. However, how each individual wishes to spend the Sabbath and the festivals has to depend upon each individual. I believe that Bible and Talmud as our national literature must be studied by everyone. It's our national literature as well as our religious literature. As the festivals are our national holidays as well as our religious holidays. But no one can can be forced to practice any ritual that he does not wish to practice. And therefore, it should be very simple, because from every perspective, religious coercion is an oxymoron. If it's coerced, by definition, it cannot be religious. And therefore, there ought be no religious coercion. When I say that the Sabbath should be the national rest day, it means that anyone that wants to rest on the Sabbath should be able to do so and not be forced to go to work. It does not, however, mean that everyone has to be forced into not driving his car on the Sabbath or not taking a bus on the Sabbath. That has to be open to individual predilection. Let me take as an example the women of the wall, because I think it's a very important issue. I'll try to demonstrate as clearly as I can what went wrong. And it didn't have to go wrong. First of all, as a student of the Talmud and as an Orthodox rabbi, can women wear tefillin? Talmud, Tractate Eruvin, Kuf Samach Zayin, 167. Quote, Michal, the daughter of King Saul, wore tefillin, and none of the rabbis complained. That seems to be a carte blanche statement that it's permissible for women to wear tefillin. Can women don a prayer shawl? Wear the ritual fringes? First of all, my grandmother did. My religious grandmother. And many Lithuanian religious women wore tzitzit. The Rambam, Maimonides, the greatest decisor in Jewish history, a halachist, thought by most to have been an Orthodox Jew, writes in Hilchot Tzitzit, chapter 3, that tzitzit is a positive commandment determined by time. Therefore, women are not obligated, but if they wish to, they certainly can wear tzitzit. What's the problem? What's the screaming? What's the name calling? And I'll tell you where it stems from. It stems from the fact that whereas the Western Wall is a national shrine and should be seen as a national shrine, it's a place which has attracted Jewish prayers ever since Abraham took Isaac to the Akedah 4,000 years ago. So it should be a national shrine. And the national shrine means precisely this: a national shrine where everyone should be able to pray. I'm very upset with the Temple Mount because I can't pray there. So it's difficult for it to be a national shrine if I'm forbidden from praying there by some kind of an agreement of our government and the Waqf. I certainly think that the Muslims have the right to pray there, but so do I. I certainly think that Christians have the right to pray there, so do I. The same thing should be true of the Kotel. Everyone should have the right to pray there. What the government of the State of Israel did is make a national shrine into a local synagogue. You know what that's like? When I first came to Israel, I thought that God should be the prime minister of the universe. Israel made God the minister of religions. And then they went ahead and canceled the ministry. But no one seems to care much. They took God and limited him immeasurably. And they took the kotel and turned it from a national center of religious prayer into the fiefdom of a specific rabbi. You can agree with him, you can disagree with him, but it's absolutely absurd. Now, perhaps what has to happen, if you have many, many people who insist on their own rules and regulations of prayers, and it's the way Judaism has developed over the years, especially in the diaspora. There are those who will not pray in a synagogue which is separate seated, those that will not pray in a synagogue that's egalitarian. And that's okay, as long as they respect each other and each other's rights. So maybe there has to be separate areas within the kotel for separate types of prayers, and that would also be fine. But the present situation is dwarfing the kotel and prayer at the kotel by making it the fiefdom of one individual rabbi. It shouldn't be that way. It's totally illogical for it to be that way. The rules should be changed. And I believe that it will be changed. Thanks to Anat, thanks to the women of the wall, and thanks to, I think, people who understand very well that the kotel should be bigger than any Orthodox, conservative, Reform, non-affiliated rabbi. The truth is, we have a magnificent tradition that is multicolored and variegated, and people who feel very strongly. We have to just try to feel very strongly about an overarching unity. Unity doesn't have to be uniformity. Unity doesn't mean that everyone has to do and think like you do. There can be an overarching respect for a 4,000-year-old tradition without in any way coercing any kind of individual action. When that happens, Israel will have truly made it and the Messiah will have come. Thank you.
Anat, thank you both very, very much. And I live by Dayenu. This is already Dayenu. So thank you very, very much. Anat, would you be willing to expand? Rabbi Riskin spoke about what he understands the Jewishness of a Jewish state to mean. And the term that he was very explicit, speaking Jewishness in terms of the Jewish people, Jewish nation. How do you understand the Jewishness of a Jewish democracy? And how do you understand the relation? Are you looking for a separation of state and religion within Israel? Or are you looking for a different model?
It's okay to stand up?
Anything that you like.
Okay.
You do whatever you feel comfortable.
That's what they teach you in political school. So the Jewishness of the Jewish state, first and foremost, is one, in my opinion, is in one of the greatest achievements of the Zionist movement. I would say even the whole Zionist movement would have been worth it just for this achievement. The fantastic, the beautiful, the wonderful Hebrew language. The fact that this country speaks Hebrew and the fact that Hebrew is being created and recreated is a miracle, is fantastic. Hebrew is so sweet. I'm so sorry to see some of your kids abroad trying to struggle with Hebrew and hating it. Hebrew is so profound, so much wiser than those who speak it. Every word has... the words have so much gravity. Every day I learn something new about my own culture just because of the Hebrew and what it means. Look at the word mishma'at, discipline, and the word mashma'ut, meaning, that both come out of Shema. It's super. We can have an evening of Hebrew that you will lick your lips and say, this is it. I'm moving just to speak Hebrew every day. So the fact that this is the national language of the Jewish people in Israel, it's a fantastic achievement. And the fact that it was resurrected, there are people from all over the world who come here to try to learn how to rebuild their languages that died from what we did with Hebrew is fantastic. Second thing is that I completely agree with you, Rabbi, that national holidays are the Jewish holidays. I used to make a point out of taking my kids to the YMCA to show them in December the tree, the only tree in public sphere in Jerusalem, and to tell them, you see these little balls, yes, they're sukkah decorations, but there is another holiday, and it's, look at these beautiful colors, and they're presents for the YMCA kids under the tree, and to expose them to the possibility of this other holiday. I think that's great. I think it's wonderful that Yom Kippur in Israel is a day without car travel, and you know, it is not legislated. You can actually go into your car and drive on Yom Kippur. It is a covenant among the Israelis that we don't drive on Yom Kippur. It's the day of the bicycle. Tricycles, bicycles on the Jerusalem-Tel Aviv highway, tricycles are driving. You can, this has been tried. You can lie down in the middle of Zion Square and you're fine on Yom Kippur. The Kol Israel starts at 5 in the morning with the Perek Hayom B'Tehilim. It starts with the sound, you know, the Big Ben is the sound of the BBC, and the sound of Kol Israel is da-da-da-da-da-da-da, Bereshit bara Elohim. And then there is Perek Hayom B'Tanach, read by Dan Kaner, and then there is Shema Israel. Who does that? I think it's still Amos Chacham, alav Shalom. He's still reading. Yes. And this is how our radio begins. And I think that if every person in Israel wouldn't move without an order from the rabbi, we would not be one iota more Jewish. This is not how this Jewish part thing works. Judaism, for me, is the values that navigate the Jewish state, and the big arguments I have with all the people I argue with, there seems to be a lot of them, is about what are the values that navigate the Jewish state. I'll give you an example. Can I give a short example? One of the contenders to become chief rabbi of Israel is Rabbi Shmuel Eliyahu, the chief rabbi of Tzfat. The rabbi of Tzfat, for the last 10 years, have been publishing incitement against minorities, particularly in Tzfat, on 4 different categories. One shouldn't rent an apartment or sell an apartment to an Arab. One should not employ an Arab and not buy from an institution that employs Arab. One should do everything to not allow Jewish women to socialize with Arabs, and even his consent to the book Torat HaMelech, which talks about killing Arabs and that they're less than people. He is a state-funded rabbi. He receives something around 1 million shekel a year, the cost of the salary, 980,000 to be exact. And I am paying for a state employee to incite against minorities. Last year, a mosque was burnt 45 minutes away from the Tzfat. There wasn't a person at the burnt mosque who didn't mention the neighbor from Tzfat as one of the inspirations for that burnt mosque. This is a value. The love the stranger as yourself, if I am not wrong, is listed 36 times in the Bible. I don't know, I'm a mother of a 17-year-old. I know when I have to say to someone 32 times something, okay? When God says 36 times, love the stranger as yourself because you were a stranger in Egypt. I don't know, maybe we should listen. When I say to my kid 36 times, put the laundry in the hamper, it's because it's counterintuitive to pick up put it. It's just too hard. The Shabbat is listed less times. Kashrut is less times. And you know how many more governments in Israel fell over Shabbat observance than any other reason. The minister walked on Shabbat, they didn't walk on Shabbat, he traveled on Shabbat, the mashchan was moved on Shabbat, things like that. Shabbat is very important. Well, I'm saying that love the stranger as yourself is also very, very important. One of the failures of our organization has been to fight racist rabbis. There are 49 rabbis who are state-paid, who are inciting for violence against minorities, and they seem to be above the law. We haven't been able to succeed with the Attorney General. There are laws in place in Israel. You're not allowed to incite for violence against minorities. It carries a 5-year imprisonment, and not one rabbi has been punished yet for doing that. I think this is a sham for Judaism. This is what worries me. Now, there is something that I think is not Jewish in the Jewish state. And also the revolutionary notion that women are people and that we have spiritual needs and desires to have a bat mitzvah just next to all the 100,000 bar mitzvahs on the other side of the partition at the wall. These are the things that I think would make us a Jewish state. If we really... You know, Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem it really encapsulates all of it. There is no chidush without looking at Kedem, and there is no Kedem without being Mechudash. And the amazing thing, this is the slogan of the chief Rabbanut. The Rabbi Cook's idea that Hayashan Yitchadesh ve'Hadash Yitkadesh. How would you translate that?
The old shall be renewed, and the new shall be sanctified.
The old shall be renewed, and the renewed shall be sanctified.
English is a nice language.
Why don't they read their... Why don't they read their own slogan? And yes, English is profoundly wonderful, but in English I see 9 words that describe the same thing, and in Hebrew, 1 word with 9 profound, fantastic meanings.
Thank you very much. Rabbi Riskin, you stated very clearly that the way if we take the microcosm of the wall, that your position is that when religion is legislated, it's not religion. And that the ideal form, and it's, as you said, it's just so commonsensical, that it should just be divided. And however we divide it, there should be room at the kotel because everybody should be allowed to pray however they want. And it's like, it couldn't be clear. I want to ask you to expand, if you're willing, beyond the issue of the wall. Anat spoke about rabbis, and one of the things that has been an essential part of your institutions is to produce different types of rabbis. Rabbis who would never even be in the room with somebody who doesn't stand for the types of values that you teach. And to produce generations of different types of rabbis who sanctify God's name publicly and who live by a very high moral standard. And that's one of the core goals that you gave to your institutions, to produce a different type of Orthodox rabbi, both for Israel and outside of Israel, as well as women. Not calling them rabbis, but to put them in positions of authority and decision. And so your record is long. But I want to ask you about the institution of the rabbinate itself in the country. We divide the wall. Should there even be one rabbinate in the state of Israel? Or should there be multiple rabbinates? Does it make sense in your mind that the state of Israel, which is Jewish in the terms that you mentioned, should have one rabbinate, or should it move in another direction?
Look, I could give you a litany of what occurred to me as an Orthodox rabbi when I came to Israel. I see the rabbinate as, not as a profession, but as an expression of my innermost being. And I worked very, very hard in the development of Efrat 7 years before I came. I was the rabbi of the synagogue in East Lincoln Center. I was a professor of Talmud and Bible at Hebrew University. I love to teach. I love to preach. I love to rabbinate. And therefore, I love to hatch, match, and dispatch. And I knew that there was an election. I wanted to run for election as the rabbi of Efrat. Now, I knew also that Efrat was slated to be a city from its very inception. And a city rabbi has to take a special test given by the elder rabbis of Jerusalem. Chief rabbi of Jerusalem at that time, the head of religious Zionism, Rav Yisraeli, the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, Rav Kolitz, and the chief Sephardi rabbi, Rav Mishash. So I went to find out when the test would be given. I have a smicha from Rav Soloveitchik. I had a private smicha from Rav Gorin, a private smicha from Avram Shapira, but I knew I would have to take this test. So I went to find out from the secretary of the chief rabbinate at the time, 30 years ago. Pardon me, but when will the test be given? He said, there's no date. Okay. What do you have to know for the test? All of Shas and Poskim, the whole Talmud and the history of its commentaries throughout the generations. When will you know when there will be a test? There's no date for that either. So I think I was beginning to get the idea. I said, tell me, are you trying to tell me something? So we took down a file. My name was on the file. And he said, your daughter was in the army. That's not for an Orthodox rabbi in Israel. And besides, you have to publish. I said, well, I've published. Yes, but probably about the legendary part of Judaism. Not the halachic. No, I've published in halacha too. Probably in English. I said, yes. He said, well, go home, translate it. By that time, maybe your daughter will be out of the army and we'll talk. Anyway, I hit the ceiling. And I hit the ceiling with the chief rabbi. And I got a date. And I went for the test. And you can imagine I was feeling like a penny waiting for change. And I got there at about, they told me to get there at 9 o'clock. I got there at 8:30. No one else was there, not even any of the testers. They came in about 9:45. Other people began coming in to be tested. And everybody was taken before me. It was already 12 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was quite disgruntled. And I realized soon would be lunchtime, and that would be the end of my test. And the election in Efrat was scheduled for 3 weeks from then. And therefore I had no chance of running for election. So I went into the chief rabbi. At that time, the chief rabbis were in the same building where you were tested. It was all in Heichal Shlomo in Jerusalem. And the chief rabbi let me hear when he spoke to the 3 testing rabbis. And he said, what about Riskin? He can't be a chief rabbi in Israel. He can't be a rabbi in Israel. Why not? He has no beard. But he's extremely well known and successful in America. Let him go back to America. And the chief rabbi, Rav Shapira, said to whoever he was talking to in that room, you don't have to pass him, but you have to test him. I was in my early 40s. I wasn't exactly a child. I'm an Orthodox rabbi from a major Orthodox institution in Israel. So what I want you to understand, and what I want you to understand, is that the problem is not orthodoxy, and the problem is certainly not Jewish law. But there are individuals, rabbis, who are considered to be authentic, most authentic, because they wear apparel and garb that was worn in the 16th, 17th centuries. And that makes them the most authentic. And they have hijacked my Torah. Now, what I did discover in Israel is, though, that this is a country of amazing opportunity. It's miracle, not mud. And if you keep fighting, you win. I went into that office to take the test, feeling 2 inches tall. But I really got through it very well. And when I was able to answer their questions, and to answer their questions properly, they passed me on the test with flying colors. And then, of course, they asked, so you know Jewish law, so why don't you wear a beard? So I thought for a minute, and I decided to tell them the answer that I thought that they would probably be the only answer they would accept. I said, Shalom bayit. My wife doesn't want me to wear a beard. And you know what? It worked. Nobody's bothered me since then. And I also made certain that we started a yeshivat hesder for women, which has made it now completely de rigueur for religious Orthodox women to serve in every aspect of the armed forces. We have over 70 religious women officers, and they're in the Air Force, and they're in Secret Service, and they're in intelligence, and they're in every important branch of the armed forces. In other words, you can win, but you have to keep on fighting. The important thing that I want everyone to understand is the most vocal are, as far as I'm concerned, the least authentic. And the most authentic expression of Judaism is also the most pluralistic.
I'm having a lot of fun, but I want you to have some fun too. So if you can just raise your hands so that I could see who would like to ask a question. Okay, we're going to start with this side, and then we're going to take 3-4 questions, and then don't address it to a particular person. Just say the question, and either of you will answer with any point you like. Yes, we're going to go, and don't worry, we're going to come to you so you can rest your hands. We'll start here. Yes, please.
First, a very quick comment. With all due respect, that 16th, 17th century apparel is hijacking our Torah, not just your Torah. And I know we can't predict, but if one were to go to the kotel and up to the Torah, a woman, I know that we're now allowed to wear talit and tefillin, but what would happen to a woman who wanted to daven with talit and tefillin at the actual Torah?
Thank you. Yes, please.
question of marriage within Israel, a specific issue. Beyond Brit Zugiyut, what is your feelings on providing all opportunities, multiple opportunities, varied opportunities for people to marry in the religious tradition by their individual choices?
Thank you. Let's continue. These are succinct, great questions. We're going. Yes, please, go ahead.
Is Women of the Wall interested in expanding to take on the egalitarian approach? Do you want the help of other people, not just women? I know there's a lot of chatter about that.
Yes, please.
What is the state of your dialogue right now with your Muslim friends?
We're going to hold that question for tonight, okay? I don't mean disrespect, but I want to stay on issue now, okay? Yes, please. So please disregard that. We're not going to focus on that question, because that's another world. We want to stay on our issue for this evening.
I
Yes,
didn't
please.
hear a clear answer. Should the rabbinate being supported by the state be abolished, or should the state support equally all forms of Judaism with state money?
Thank you. Yes, please.
Yeah, I heard you mention about pluralism, and so for them, there are a lot of different thoughts and different opinions within Orthodox Judaism, some of which can be very lenient, which could be used towards pluralism, but there's definitely a hesitancy towards it. Where do you see that limit, and do you think it's our Shalom, something of that nature, if we have an impetus to do that?
Thank you. Okay, please repeat the question.
You want more specific, or?
Yeah, more specific.
So, for example, like Eliezer Berkovitz makes an argument that you could recognize reform conversion in Orthodoxy, and he makes this argument. So, my question is, taking something like kula within conversion. My question is, do you think that there's an impetus as an Orthodox rabbi, if you're committed to pluralism, to doing that? And also, if you believe that, is there a limit to that?
Thank you. Last question for this round. Yes, please.
Are there natural or logical limitations to pluralism? Would we support a Messianic Jewish group that wanted to daven at the hotel? Would we support a group that wanted to bring instrumentation to the hotel on Shabbat as an expression of our commitment to pluralism?
Instrumentation. Musical instruments on Shabbat. Okay, I think that's, Anat, would you like to start? Good luck.
So, what would happen to a woman wearing a tefillin at the wall? Nothing. It's now, the Sobel decision allows you to bring in Sobel, an Orthodox judge on the 25th of April, allows women to pray, our group to pray as is their custom, wearing phylacteries and talit and praying out loud. But the Torah is a problem. The object from which we can read is not allowed in without his permission. He can give you permission to use one of the Torahs that are there, and he's not giving this permission. How can you help? I don't see this, I want this nohal, this regulation to be suspended at least 11 times a year when Women of the Wall come. And to have this suspended, we need pressure on Netanyahu, on Peres, on any decision maker. How do we want to make this pressure? We want Torah scrolls from all over the world. We already have one from Saskatchewan in Canada. I looked in the map, it's on the North Pole. That Torah will be moving from one congregation to another all the way to Israel and coming to the wall, demanding to be read here. It will be turned away. We will have a wall of shame of all these Torahs coming from all over the world, demanding to come in until this regulation is suspended. I'm afraid that would be the way to go on that one. How to get married in Israel. My son just got married a few weeks ago. Yes. He was married, all I have is 7 photographs from this wedding that took place in Nicosia under a big cross and a picture of the Archbishop of Nicosia. He and Michal went there. The photographs were taken by another Israeli couple who were there to get married in Nicosia. 80,000 couples got married. It's the 3rd largest industry on the island of love, to officiate in the wedding of Israelis. And that's the wedding. So I would like Israelis to have the choice to get married by the state in Israel and have the ceremony by the rabbi of their choice. And of course, the important part of divorce. You get divorced by the state in family court, and then if you married Orthodox, you need to do the divorce in the rabbinic court. But if you got divorced, if you got married Reform or conservative or in a civil ceremony, you don't go to rabbinic court, which is what right now all Israelis have to go through, rabbinic court, and the stories coming out of there are impossible. And Rabbi Riskin, much more than me, knows these stories and has actually done something tremendous about them. Are women of the wall ready to be egalitarian or push for the... Look, one of the things about being a minority, small group, is that we exert pressure on one tiny point. We are demanding the 4 T's, Talit, Tfilah, Torah, and Tefillin for women at the wall. That is small, elegant, and that's what we're pushing for. The fact that we found a G point of the Jewish people, and now you're all waking up and thinking, hey, that's wonderful. Yes, I think there should be a solution there for everybody else, but we are going to focus on our strategic goal. We've worked on it 24 years and 9 months, and we're getting there. My suggestion for the wall is to share not the space, but to share time. This is how Jews have always built structures and time rather than structures and space. While the Goyim built all the great cathedrals, this is Avraham Yoshua Heschel's idea, we built the palace in time, the Shabbat, the Chagim. And I think if we can share the tomb of the patriarchs with Muslims in Hebron, we can very well share the Western Wall time-wise. We could do it. Shachris, it's an ultra-Orthodox synagogue. From Hanetz, from 4:45 in the morning till 10 in the morning, it's Shachris. It's Orthodox. Anyone who wants to go there should know there'll be a partition. But after a particular time, it's open to all, no partition, a national monument, open to everybody, and every Orthodox person who desires the partition will know that this period of time is now sharing it space in time may be a very elegant way, not to add partitions to the world, but actually yank them out. But if need be, then yes, a third partition, one for men, one for women, and of course a partition for egalitarian, for a grandmother who wants to go see her grandson's bar mitzvah, and she wants to go with him. You see women trying to climb on the plastic chairs, and it's, okay. The solution for the chief rabbanut, I am with the person who says, let any community choose the rabbi of their choice. Of course, in Bnei Brak, I believe that an ultra-Orthodox rabbi would fit the needs of the community. I come from the city council world, and yes, communities need a leader that fits their language and their needs. But in Baka neighborhood, Rabbi Levi Wyman Kelman fits the needs of this community. I know because we conducted a poll. But 3 other rabbis get salaries as neighborhood rabbis in Baka, and Levi isn't. We are now in the Supreme Court demanding that Levi be recognized as the neighborhood rabbi, the Baka neighborhood. He gives the most services there, and he should be, may the best rabbi win, and may the state taxes go to the rabbi of the choice of the different people. And are there limits to pluralism at the wall? Yes, there are limits. About the issue, you asked about Jews for Jesus. I think you asked about that. The state of Israel sees them as members of another religion. So even though they're a son of a Jewish mother and have not, they are considered members of another religion and therefore are not fit for Chok HaShvut. It's a decision of the court, I think, from 11 years ago. So, but yes, Beiti Beit Tfilah Yikareh Lechol Ha'amim. I was ashamed that when the Pope visited here in 2009, Rabbi Rabinowitz asked him to take off his crucifix and said that it's an insult for the Jewish people. No, I think, and then there was this big debate with Rabinovich who said that I would demand that if the Pope goes to a mosque, he would take off his shoes. So if he goes to our place, he should take off his crucifix. And the Pope wears orange Pradas, by the way. I said, sure, he should take off his shoes, but there's a difference between the shoes and the crucifix, and Rabinovich could not understand the major difference between these two items to save his life. So there is a difference. The shoes are shoes, and this is his identity. And we should be bigger and strong enough to be allowing the Pope to wear his crucifix and not pick on every nun who walks in with her crucifix. It's fine for ביתי בית תפילה יקרא לכל העמים. Even non-Jews can come and be at the wall and admire it, as we can go into other holy places of other religions. But there are limits. I think instruments on Shabbat can offend others. You can't close your ears as you can shut your eyes. And I think maybe this is one of the regulations we could all agree on, that instruments on Shabbat are not allowed. But how about many other things that are not allowed? Now, what about the Shmate parade, that the Shmate police there, that 31 women are being paid by our taxes to run after every kid over 6 years old and cover her with some Shmate or another? Why should a 6-year-old feel that there's anything wrong with her beautiful body when she comes to the wall and have to have this? I'm sorry, there were many questions, that's why.
Thank you.
I'll tell you, this reminds me of, we had a Jofa conference a few weeks ago, an excellent conference actually, about women and divorce, and Tzipi Livni spoke first. And I have not necessarily been a political fan of Tzipi Livni's, but she spoke magnificently well about many issues, such as the issues of Shabbat, etc. And I said to her, you know, as far as I'm concerned, you can be chief rabbi of Israel. And I'm saying the same thing now to Anat. I agreed with almost every religious thing that she has said so far. Let me just go try to list them in order. First of all, I would just ask, give me the right, I'll make it very, very short, but to answer the question about do we still have dialogue with the Palestinians? Because I think if I have the opportunity of meeting so many people, and we are trying to break down stereotypes, I think it's very important. Let me just tell you that yesterday, Erev Ramadan, Or Torah Stone gave out thousands of shekels to poor families in Wadi Nis, the village near us, just like we give out chesed before Pesach and before Rosh Hashanah to families that I know require it in Efrat. We do it to Wadi Nis, which is our close village neighbors, before Ramadan and before the major festivals. And last evening, I spent 2 hours dialoguing with 5 sheikhs. We are constantly engaged in precisely this, and we still have excellent relationships with the Palestinians, much cooperation. My problem is unfortunately with the Palestinian leadership and the hateful things that come out from that leadership, including Mahmoud Abbas on the Palestinian newspapers and televisions that he's in charge of. As far as the Palestinian peoples are concerned, they deserve much more. I believe that we must and can share this land, and there is enough to be shared, and we are having constant dialogues with the people. The question that you asked, I'm sorry I don't know your name, but about our Torah. It is our Torah. I believe it is our Torah. I think you have as much right to the Torah as I have. I also believe the Torah is too important to leave to Orthodox Jews alone or to leave to men alone. So you seem to be annoyed by our Torah, but I think it is our Torah, and it must become more of our Torah in agenda fashion, as well as in terms of observance or lack thereof and their relationship to Torah. all forms of Judaism. What do I think about that? And everything I'm telling you, I've written and I've said, and I feel very strongly about. I come from America. I'm proud of it. I love many things about America. I still carry an American passport alongside of my Israeli passport. I love Thanksgiving. First of all, I love turkey. On Motzai Shabbos, on Friday night, rather than on Thursday evening. But we still very much celebrate Thanksgiving. And I think America has done great things, and democracy is wonderful, and has a great deal still to teach Israel about that, as well as about the accountability of politicians. They are about as accountable as achrayatut is pronounceable. Now, part of my American background has taught me to absolutely abhor monopolies. And it's true of business monopolies, and it's even more true of religious monopolies. I'm a very proud Orthodox Jew. I can learn a great deal from non-Orthodox prayer services, although, I tell you openly, I would not choose to pray in a non-Orthodox service. But I learn a great deal from it. I think it's important. And I believe that one of the things that has helped modern Orthodoxy to develop in America was what they learned from conservative and reform. And I think the same thing of Israel. I think that the Orthodox religious establishment in Israel, of which I am a part, has an extremely lot to learn from non-Orthodox forms of religion. And when there is a monopoly, what will happen, unfortunately, and it makes me cry, I mean that very literally, is that you'll have such a large percentage of Jews in Israel opting out of religious marriages. It's very simple. If you feel you're the only game in town, you don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to try a little harder. You don't have to feel that you are accountable to some kind of constituency. It's a very strange rabbit here. You know, I never meet any other rabbi making hospital visits in Israel. It almost is not part of the Israeli rabbinate. When I tell people that I meet every bar mitzvah boy before the bar mitzvah who lives in a frat, I try to, and every bat mitzvah girl, typical Israeli rabbi doesn't know what I'm talking about. And that even means paying shiva calls to people who are not necessarily a member of your specific congregation, but lives in the community. So I am in favor of, in this sense, there being acceptance of the legitimacy of different forms of religion. I am a proud Orthodox Jew. I think halacha is crucial for the continuity of Judaism. However, there are others who feel differently, and they have to have the religious right to express themselves, and in every way. In every way. And I think that's also on the way to happening. In the area of conversion, I want to say two things. The one area that I'm in favor of some kind of legislation is the area of conversion because I would like to see a situation in Israel where every Israeli can marry every other Israel. That would be very important. And in the States, where there are those who believe in patrilineal descent, and that's sufficient for Jewishness, very often there are very sad problems when it comes to marrying someone from that kind of family with someone from a different kind of family. So if we could have some kind of unanimity in terms of conversion, it would be, from my point of view, extremely salutary. And part of the definition of Israel as a Jewish state. Now, I want to make very clear, I agree 100% with Anat. A Jewish state means that an Arab has right to buy land anywhere in Israel that he wants to buy land. By the way, that's what the halacha says. There's a Masechet Gerim. You know, the Bible says you're not allowed to give back a runaway slave to his owner. But you have to allow him running away because his owner is treating him unfairly or whatever. You can't return the slave. You have to give him, he has to have his freedom, and he has to be able to live in Israel. That's where Masechet Gerim was written. And the Bible says such an individual who is not Jewish has a right to live anywhere he wants to live, which is good for him, in your midst. That's how the Torah wants us to treat our minorities, the other, whom we must love in 36 different ways. So I wrote I wrote a number of articles against those rabbis who signed the petition. They are absolutely against Jewish law. Now, in their defense, I did get a letter from them, although their declaration did not maintain this. They were only against, so they said, people purchasing land. There was a Saudi Arabian company that arose in order to try to buy up Jewish land in the Galil so that there wouldn't be so many Jewish families in the Galil. And that's what they were talking about. At least that's what they wrote me back to the letter that I wrote against what they had written. But under ordinary circumstances, Jewish law does not permit it, as long as the individuals are fundamentally moral. Keep the 7 Noahide laws of morality, not to murder, not to steal, etc. Now, the laws of conversion, similarly, are extremely open. And many years ago, I was involved in an experiment in Denver to try to have one kind of unified laws of conversion. And I felt it would be very easy. Because, you know, there is no rabbi of the Talmud, no great advisor of the early years, I would say until the 19th century, whoever said that in order to convert, you must be a completely observant Jew. No one says it. The Talmud merely says you have to know several of the more stringent laws and several of the more lenient laws. And the Talmud says, Yevamot 46b, you should not be too harsh with the convert or too exacting. Embrace him, her. And the only laws that they mention at all are the laws of the Sabbath, some of the laws of kashrut, and the laws of giving charity to the poor and educators. Make sure they get good salaries. That's it. That's what the Talmud talks about. Now, in Denver, we try to work out a system. The Reform rabbi who had the largest congregation at that time refused to accept circumcision as one of the criteria, and therefore we couldn't work it out. But I think that if there were a willingness to work it out, it could work out, and I think such a system could work out in Israel. And many other rabbis think the way I do, including one who is running for the chief rabbinate, Rabbi Stav, understands that as well. And this is especially true of the Russian Jews who came from Israel from the former Soviet Union under the right of return, are not halakhically Jewish, and it behooves us that they be Jewish. And the conversion laws are not that difficult at all. The way they're being interpreted now, they're very difficult. So I still would like to see one conversion, a general conversion kind of rulings that everyone could adhere to. I think that would be excellent. But in the absence of that, even there I think there has to be pluralism, because so far what I want to do, I mean, I'll just, I don't know, is there anybody here who is in any way associated with the Ministry of the Interior? Because I want to tell you, I just wrote a very angry letter. I have students from all over the world. They never have difficulty getting student visas, except the students that I have from Africa, and I'm very much involved with some communities in Africa that are amazing, outside of Uganda. And 7 Chinese students who are still, some of them are still waiting after 3.5 years to be converted, and I believe it is downright racism and unwarranted prejudice. And I wrote a blistering email yesterday. I can't get a meeting with the Minister of the Interior. I will get to him, and I will win the fight. But these are the kinds of things that are upsetting. But at least in terms of all of my fights so far, Baruch Hashem, I've won. You just have to stick to it and be very persistent. As far as musical instruments, so I very much agree with Anat. If there are separate times or separate places, then it won't necessarily interfere with anyone else. But you wouldn't want to do something, I don't think, that would be seen as being the antithesis of religious worship for many of the people who are worshiping there. But again, however you divide it, if you divide it space-wise or time-wise, at the time when there are open kind of types of services, b'vakasha. Messianic Judaism, and that I think is a very important point. I'm very much involved in Jewish-Christian dialogue. But my line stops at Jews for Jesus or Messianic Judaism. It's been determined by the Supreme Court, perhaps 8-9 years ago, as you mentioned, but even earlier than that, in the Brother Daniel case in the late 50s, that someone who accepts the messiahship and divinity of Jesus is by definition not a Jew. Now, can someone who accepts the messiahship of Jesus and come into a synagogue? Of course. I have very many deeply religious Christian friends who are regularly my guests, and they usually come with me to prayer services, and they're most welcome, however they come. Recently, by the way, there was an interesting ruling that came from a number of Orthodox rabbis from the States. And I had a very similar case of a convert who was married, and the convert's mother was a religious Catholic, and she walked down the aisle with a cross. She's still the mother. She has a right to be who she is. If I want to be who I am, I have to give her the right to be who she is. And I think under Jewish law, there would be no objection. Thank you.
Being aware of the hour, and since our goal was to be able to hear our speakers, I'd like you all to please join me in thanking these two remarkable people.